Before we start our today's story, I want to take out time to thank you all for your support. If you haven't subscribed, please kindly do so and turn on the notification bell so you will always be the first to be notified. Also like, share, and comment where you're watching us from. The morning sun over downtown Atlanta was already unforgivingly bright, bouncing off glass skyscrapers like shards of polished gold. Inside that moving storm of luxury cars, business suits, and rushing footsteps, Harriet Williams was running late on the most important day of her life. Her first day at Blackwell Global Enterprises, a company everyone in the city talked about, but only a few ever truly entered. And Harriet was already starting it wrong. Come on, she muttered under her breath, gripping the steering wheel as traffic refused to move. Her GPS kept recalculating. The parking garage entrance was blocked, and when she finally found a space, she misjudged the turn. SCRRT. The sound of her car tire scraping the concrete pillar made her stomach drop. No, not today, she whispered, grabbing her bag and bolting out before she could even process the scratch. She didn't have time to care, not when she was already 12 minutes late. Harriet rushed through the gleaming parking garage, her heels striking the polished floor in rapid rhythm. Her crisp navy blazer was still perfect, her hair neatly pinned, but her expression told a different story. Stress, panic, pressure. She checked her phone again. 8:42 a.m. Her onboarding was at 8:30. Perfect, just perfect, she muttered, speeding toward the elevator bank. That was when it happened. She turned a corner too fast and collided directly into someone stepping out of the executive elevator. Thud. Her coffee flew first, then her balance, then her dignity. The cup spun in slow motion before exploding against the marble floor, splashing dark coffee across a pair of spotless black leather shoes. A deep silence followed. Harriet froze. Her eyes dropped instantly to the mess, then slowly up. A man stood in front of her, tall, immaculately dressed in a charcoal suit that looked tailored within an inch of perfection. Not a wrinkle, not a flaw. His posture was calm, controlled, almost like he had expected the collision before it happened. But what unsettled her most was the way he was looking at her. Not angry, not surprised, just mildly amused. Harriet straightened immediately, heat rising in her chest. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't see you. I was rushing and... You were rushing, he repeated smoothly, glancing down at his coffee-covered shoes. His voice wasn't raised, not even slightly annoyed. That made it worse. Yes, obviously I was rushing, Harriet snapped, embarrassment turning quickly into irritation. I just said that. I'm late for my first day, and this elevator situation is already a disaster. The man tilted his head slightly. Your first day. Yes. A pause. Then, calmly, interesting timing to be spilling coffee on people. Harriet blinked. Excuse me? Now she was fully facing him, eyes narrowed. You literally stepped out of the elevator at the exact wrong moment. I didn't do that on purpose. I didn't say you did, he replied, but his tone suggested otherwise. Harriet exhaled sharply. Look, I don't know who you are, but I really don't have time for this. I need to get upstairs before I get fired on my first day because of she gestured at him, a coffee incident. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. That smile, that calm, controlled, almost entertained smile. It irritated her more than anything else. You think this is funny? She asked. I think, he said slowly, glancing at the stain on his shoes again, that you're very confident for someone who just attacked a stranger in a parking garage. Harriet scoffed. I didn't attack you. I spilled coffee. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. Another pause. He stepped slightly closer, not aggressively, just enough to tighten the space between them. His presence was steady, grounded, like he owned the air around him. Harriet refused to step back. I'll pay for your dry cleaning, she said quickly. Just give me your name or whatever. I'll sort it out later. His eyes held hers for a second longer than necessary. Then he said, You're late. Harriet froze. What? You're already late? He repeated, glancing at her ID badge clipped slightly crooked to her blazer. First day, and you're already behind schedule. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. "How do you know that?" she finally asked. Instead of answering, he simply stepped aside. The path to the elevators was clear now, but something about the way he moved felt intentional. Controlled, like he was letting her pass, not moving out of her way. Harriet hesitated. "Again," she said tightly, "I'm sorry about your shoes. I didn't mean to." "I know," he interrupted softly. That stopped her, because it wasn't the words. It was how easily he said them, like he had already decided what she meant. Harriet narrowed her eyes. "You're weird, you know that?" A faint exhale, almost a laugh, escaped him. "I've been called worse." She stared at him for another second, tried to figure him out, trying to place him, trying to understand why a random man in a parking garage felt like more than just a random man. But she had no time. Not anymore. She turned sharply toward the elevator, pressing the button repeatedly, as if urgency alone could make it arrive faster. Behind her, she heard his voice one last time. Calm, low, almost thoughtful. "You should watch where you're going, Harriet Williams." Her entire body froze. Slowly, she turned her head back. "How do you know my name?" she demanded. But he was already walking away, not rushing, not looking back, just disappearing into the bright, polished hallway of the executive floor, like he belonged there more than anyone else. Harriet stood still, heart pounding now for a completely different reason. The elevator doors finally opened behind her, but she didn't move immediately, because one question echoed louder than everything else. Who was that man, and why did it feel like he had been waiting for her? And somewhere deep in the back of her mind, a worse thought began to form. She had no idea that argument was about to cost her everything. The elevator doors slid shut with a soft chime, sealing Harriet Williams inside a sleek glass and steel capsule that felt far too expensive to be this emotionally suffocating. She exhaled sharply. "First day," she whispered to herself, pressing the button for the executive floor again. "And I'm already spilling coffee on strangers who know my name." The elevator didn't respond to her frustration. It simply rose, smooth and silent, like nothing in the world could possibly go wrong inside it. But Harriet already knew better. As the floors ticked upward, her reflection stared back at her from the polished metal doors. Slightly disheveled hair, tightened jaw, eyes still burning with embarrassment and irritation. And then, a soft ding. The elevator jerked. Not violently, but enough to make her shift her weight instinctively. She frowned. No. The lights flickered once, then stabilized. But the elevator didn't move. Harriet pressed the emergency panel. Once. Twice. Nothing. She exhaled slowly, then let out a short, frustrated laugh. "You have got to be kidding me." And then, as if the universe wanted to add insult to injury, a second ding sounded from the opposite side. The elevator had stopped between floors, and the doors, after a moment of mechanical hesitation, slid open halfway. Harriet blinked. Standing in the narrow gap was him. The man from the parking garage. Still calm, still composed, still looking like nothing in the world could disturb him, even a malfunctioning elevator. He stepped inside without asking, without hesitation, like this was entirely normal. Harriet immediately straightened. "Are you following me?" He pressed no buttons. He simply stood beside her, hands in his pockets. "I was already headed up," he said evenly. "That's not an answer." "It is. You just don't like it." Harriet scoffed under her breath. Unbelievable. The elevator remained stuck, humming faintly, suspended between floors with no intention of moving anytime soon. "Perfect." She crossed her arms. "So now we're trapped in an elevator on my first day after I spilled coffee on you. This is officially the worst morning of my life." A faint pause. Then, quietly, he said, "It's only 9:10 a.m. That made her look at him. For the first time, really look. Up close, he wasn't just well-dressed. He was deliberate. Every detail of him felt intentional. The way he stood, the way he watched without staring, the way he seemed completely unaffected by chaos. It was irritating and oddly distracting. "Do you always talk like that?" she asked. "Like what?" "Like you're above everything." A subtle shift in his expression, almost amusement again. "I'm not above everything," he replied. "Just most things that don't matter." Harriet narrowed her eyes. And I don't matter? The elevator hummed louder for a moment, as if it too was listening. Then he said, "You're very quick to assume you're the center of every conversation." Harriet opened her mouth, then closed it again. She hated that she didn't have a clean comeback ready. Instead, she leaned back against the elevator wall, forcing herself to breathe. "Okay," she said finally, calmer now. "Let's restart this. I'm Harriet Williams. I'm new here, and I'm already having a terrible day." He nodded slightly, as if acknowledging a formal introduction. "I know who you are," he said again. Her eyes narrowed instantly. "That's the second time you've said that, and the second time you've ignored it." "Because it's weird," she shot back. "Nobody knows my name on my first day." Then, almost casually, he said, "Some people do." Something about the way he said it made her chest tighten slightly. Harriet studied him again. "Who are you?" For the first time, he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the elevator panel, then at the flickering emergency light above them, then finally back at her, as if deciding how much truth to give. "That depends," he said. "On what?" "On how much you need to know right now." That answer shouldn't have made sense, but it did, and that was the problem. Harriet let out a short laugh. "That's not how introductions work." "In most places," he agreed. She tilted her head slightly. "And in this place?" Then he said, "In this place, people usually introduce themselves after they understand the room they're standing in." Harriet frowned. "That sounds ridiculous." "It sounds accurate." The elevator shifted slightly, still stuck. Harriet sighed, rubbing her forehead. "Okay, mystery man, let me guess. You're some senior executive who enjoys talking in riddles and making people uncomfortable." A faint smile. Not denial. Not confirmation either. Just that same controlled amusement. "You're wrong," he said simply. "About what part?" "All of it." Harriet stared at him. That was it. That was the moment. The strange, uncomfortable realization that he wasn't reacting like anyone she had ever met before. No defensiveness. No ego. Just calm certainty. It made her more unsettled than anything else. She stepped slightly closer to the control panel, trying the emergency button again. Still nothing. "Great," she muttered. "Stuck in an elevator with a man who refuses to answer basic questions. This is exactly how I wanted my career to begin." Behind her, she heard him exhale, quietly, almost like a suppressed laugh. "You laugh a lot for someone who claims to be having a terrible day," he said. Harriet turned her head slightly. "And you don't laugh enough for someone stuck in a broken elevator." A pause. Then, softer, "I don't usually get stuck." "That sounds like a privilege." "It is." The honesty in his tone made her pause. Just briefly, something shifted, not dramatically, not visibly, but enough for the air between them to feel different. Less like confrontation, more like awareness. Harriet looked away first. "That's probably the most honest thing you've said all morning," she admitted quietly. He didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was lower. "You're not what I expected." She frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" But instead of answering, he simply looked at her. Really looked. And for a moment, the elevator didn't feel like a trap anymore. It felt like distance had been erased without permission. Harriet swallowed, suddenly aware of how close they were, of how controlled his presence was, of how easily he made silence feel heavy instead of empty. She cleared her throat. "We should probably call maintenance again." But even as she said it, she didn't move. Neither did he. And that was the problem, because something about him didn't sit right, and she couldn't explain why. The elevator finally opened with a soft mechanical chime, releasing Harriet Williams into a world that looked nothing like the one she had come from. The moment she stepped out, the atmosphere changed. The hallway stretched wide and spotless, lined with floor-to-ceiling glass walls that reflected the morning sun in clean, controlled brilliance. Everything was bright, too bright to feel accidental. Even the silence had structure here, like it had been designed, not simply existing. Harriet paused for half a second, then forced herself forward. "Don't freeze," she whispered under her breath. "You made it here. Just don't mess this up." Her heels clicked against the polished marble floor as she followed the signs toward human resources. Each step felt louder than it should have been, like the building itself was listening, like it was judging. She adjusted her blazer again, though nothing was wrong with it. It was more habit than necessity, an attempt to steady herself. Because the truth was simple. This wasn't her world. Not even close. Blackwell Global Enterprises didn't just feel rich. It felt engineered for people who had never had to ask for permission in their lives. Everyone she passed moved with quiet confidence, speaking in low, efficient tones, carrying tablets and designer folders like extensions of themselves. Harriet kept her expression neutral, but inside, her thoughts were louder. Don't look lost. Don't look new. Don't look like you don't belong. She turned a corner and nearly collided with a woman in a sleek cream suit. Sorry, Harriet said quickly, stepping aside. The woman glanced at her badge, then smiled politely, but not warmly. First day, Harriet hesitated for a fraction of a second. Yes. Welcome to Blackwell, the woman replied, already walking away. Try to keep up. That was it. No guidance. No friendliness. Just expectation. Harriet stood there for a moment longer than she should have, watching the woman disappear down the corridor. Then she exhaled slowly. Okay, she whispered. So that's how it is. She finally reached HR. Paperwork. Orientation. Brief instructions. Names she barely remembered 5 seconds after hearing them. Everything moved fast, efficient, and personal. Too efficient. Like there was no space here for hesitation. At one point, a man across the table scanned her resume and nodded once. You're from Houston. Yes, Harriet replied. He didn't look up again. Different pace here. She almost laughed. I can tell. But she didn't, because nothing about this room invited humor. When HR was done, she was escorted out into the main workspace. And that was when it hit her. The office floor was enormous. Open plan, glass-walled meeting rooms floating like transparent boxes, screens glowing softly with financial data and live analytics. Natural light poured in from every angle, bouncing off every surface until everything looked impossibly clean. It wasn't just an office. It was a machine. A very expensive, very unforgiving machine. Harriet Williams, a voice called. She turned. A woman stood near a workstation, mid-30s, poised, with sharp but controlled energy. Her name tag read Victoria Smith. Harriet straightened slightly. Yes, that's me. Victoria offered a professional smile. I'll be your onboarding supervisor for the day. Come with me. As Harriet followed, she noticed the difference immediately. Victoria didn't rush her, but she also didn't slow down. So, Victoria said casually, glancing at her tablet, you'll be on a 3-month probation period. Harriet nodded. Understood. You'll be evaluated on adaptability, performance, and initiative. Mistakes are not encouraged. That last word landed heavier than the rest. Harriet swallowed. Got it. Victoria continued walking. Most new hires don't last past the first 6 weeks. Harriet blinked. That's encouraging. Victoria glanced at her briefly. It's reality. They stopped near a workstation that had already been prepared for her. A sleek laptop. A badge. A schedule. No warmth. No welcome banner. Just expectation. Harriet sat down slowly, feeling the weight of the environment settle around her like invisible pressure. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment. For the first time that morning, doubt crept in. What if I can't keep up here? She shook the thought away immediately. No, not an option. Not today. She opened her laptop, and then froze slightly, because for half a second, just a flicker in her memory, she saw him again. The man from the parking garage. Calm, controlled, watching her like she was already part of something she didn't understand yet. Harriet frowned lightly. Why am I still thinking about him? Harriet, Victoria's voice snapped her back. Yes. We have a department meeting in 10 minutes. You'll observe. Harriet nodded quickly. Okay. Victoria studied her for a moment. Try not to say anything unless spoken to. That stung more than it should have. I won't, Harriet replied evenly. Victoria gave a small nod, then walked away. Harriet sat there for a moment, staring at her screen. Around her, the office moved with quiet precision. Conversations in low tones. Phones ringing softly. Typing like rainfall. And Harriet felt it again. That pressure. Not loud. Not obvious. But constant. She looked down at her schedule. Back-to-back meetings. Performance expectations. No room for error. Her phone buzzed slightly in her bag, but she ignored it. Instead, she straightened her posture. "I can do this," she whispered. But even as she said it, her mind drifted back again, to that calm voice, to that strange certainty, to the way he had looked at her, like she already belonged somewhere she hadn't reached yet. Harriet exhaled, and then stood up, because she wasn't here to fail. She was here to survive. Victoria reappeared at the edge of the workspace. "Let's go." Harriet grabbed her tablet and followed. They walked toward a large glass meeting room at the center of the floor. Inside, silhouettes of executives were already gathering. Harriet slowed slightly at the entrance. Victoria noticed. "Something wrong?" Harriet shook her head quickly. "No," but her heart was already beating faster, because something about the room felt different. Heavier, like the air itself had changed. Victoria opened the door. Harriet stepped inside, and then the meeting started. The moment Harriet Williams stepped into the conference room, the temperature of the entire floor seemed to shift. It wasn't cold. It wasn't warm. It was controlled. Bright sunlight poured through the glass walls, reflecting off a long polished mahogany table that stretched across the center of the room like a runway for power. Every seat was already occupied by executives in tailored suits, tablets open, posture perfect. No wasted movement. No noise. Just expectation. Harriet paused just inside the doorway. Behind her, Victoria Smith gave a small, professional nod. "Stand near the back. Observe." Harriet nodded quickly, stepping to the side. But she didn't relax. Not even a little. Because something about this room felt heavier than anything she had experienced that morning. The kind of silence that wasn't empty. It was intentional. Like everyone was waiting for something important to begin. Harriet scanned the room slowly, then stopped. At the head of the table, one seat remained empty. And for reasons she couldn't explain, her eyes kept returning to it. Why does that feel familiar? A faint tension crept into her chest. Then, the door on the opposite side of the room opened. Harriet didn't look immediately. She heard it first. The sound of measured footsteps. Confident, unhurried, controlled. The kind of footsteps that didn't ask for attention. They assumed it. Every executive in the room shifted slightly. Not dramatically, just enough to show awareness. Harriet turned her head, and everything in her stopped. It was him, the man from the parking garage, the man from the elevator, the man who had stood too calm in every moment she had met him. But he didn't look at her, not even once. He walked in like the room already belonged to him. Like every person inside it had been waiting for him to arrive before they could exist properly. Harriet's breath caught slightly, because this version of him was not the same man. Gone was the casual amusement. Gone was the faint teasing in his eyes. This man wore authority like it was stitched into him. A dark tailored suit, no ties slightly loosened this time, but still perfect. His expression was unreadable, his gaze sharp but calm, scanning the room once before settling forward. Every step he took felt deliberate, measured, final. Harriet's fingers tightened slightly at her side. No, this is not. He reached the head of the table, and the room rose. Every executive stood at once. Harriet blinked. Victoria, beside her, straightened immediately. Harriet followed a second later, confused but reacting late, trying to match the energy in the room. The man finally spoke, and when he did, his voice was no longer calm in the way she remembered. It was calm in a different way. Controlled authority. "I appreciate everyone being on time." Silence followed instantly. Harriet's pulse began to climb, because that voice was the same one from the elevator. But everything else about him was different. He placed a folder on the table and finally looked across the room. Slowly, precisely, and then his eyes passed over her. Just once. No recognition. No pause. No reaction. Harriet froze. Her stomach tightened instantly. He saw me, but it didn't feel like he saw her. It felt like she wasn't there at all. He continued speaking. "Quarterly projections will be revised. We're expanding into 2 new markets and restructuring the executive oversight team." Harriet barely heard the rest, because her mind was locked on one thing. This is him, not just some executive. Not just a senior staff member. The CEO, Clarence Jones. The name hit her like a physical impact. Her eyes flicked toward Victoria slightly, searching for confirmation without asking. Victoria didn't look at her, but she gave a small, subtle nod. That was enough. Harriet felt her entire body go still. The man from the parking garage. The man she argued with. The man she spilled coffee on. The man she was trapped in an elevator with. Was her boss. Her CEO. Her employer. Her first day disaster wasn't just embarrassing. It was catastrophic. Her mind scrambled rapidly, replaying every moment. The tone she used. The way she snapped at him. The coffee. The sarcasm. The attitude. Her breath quickened slightly. "Oh my God," she whispered under her breath. But no one heard her. Or, if they did, no one reacted. Because Clarence Jones was still speaking. And still not looking at her. Not even once. It was worse than anger. Worse than rejection. It was erasure. Like she had never existed in his world at all. Harriet stood frozen, her pulse loud in her ears. He knows who I am. The realization hit harder now. Because he had said her name in the garage. He had looked at her like he recognized her. And now, nothing. No acknowledgement. No connection. Just distance, so complete it felt deliberate. Harriet swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. Around her, executives were taking notes, nodding, absorbing every word he spoke like it was law. But Harriet couldn't focus. Her thoughts were spiraling. Why didn't he say anything? Why act like I don't exist? Was that all intentional? Clarence closed the folder. Meeting adjourned, he said simply. The room exhaled collectively. Everyone began to move. Seats shifting, papers closing, quiet conversations forming. Harriet stayed still for a moment too long. Because she couldn't move. Not yet. Not after that. Victoria gently touched her arm. "You're coming." Harriet blinked. Yeah. But her eyes were still on him. Clarence Jones had already turned slightly, speaking with another executive now. Calm, professional, untouched, completely unaware, or completely uninterested in her presence. Harriet slowly stepped back toward the exit. Her mind replayed the moment again. Elevator, parking garage, his voice, her name, the calm amusement in his eyes. And now, this. The contradiction didn't make sense. And that was what unsettled her the most. As she reached the door, she glanced back one last time. Clarence didn't look at her. Not once. Not even by accident. Harriet stepped out into the hallway, her chest tight, her thoughts scattered. And one realization settled deep inside her. Whatever happened between them before, it was not over, not even close. But in that room, he had erased her completely, like she had never existed. I hope you are enjoying the drama. Subscribe, like, share, and comment what you think about the story. By the time Harriet Williams returned to her desk, the world inside Blackwell Global Enterprises no longer felt like a building. It felt like a system. And, somehow, she had been placed inside its crosshairs. The conference room scene replayed in her mind on loop. Clarence Jones, CEO, the man from the elevator, the man from the parking garage, the man who had looked at her twice, once like she mattered, and once like she didn't exist at all. Harriet exhaled slowly, forcing herself to focus on her screen. Get together. But focus was harder than expected, because everything around her had changed. Or maybe she had. Harriet, Victoria Smith's voice cut through her thoughts. She looked up immediately. Yes. Victoria stood beside her desk, tablet in hand, expression composed but firm. You're joining the executive briefing in 10 minutes. Sit in, observe only. Harriet nodded quickly. Got it. Victoria paused a second longer than necessary. And Harriet? Yes. Don't speak unless you're asked. It wasn't harsh, but it wasn't gentle either. Harriet forced a small nod. Understood. Victoria walked away. Harriet watched her go, then slowly leaned back in her chair. A quiet frustration tightened in her chest. Observe. Don't speak. Don't mess up. It wasn't just instructions. It was a warning. 10 minutes later, Harriet was seated in a smaller glass-walled meeting room, surrounded again by executives. Screens lit the room with soft blue-white light, reflecting numbers, charts, projections she barely had time to process. And then the door opened. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Clarence Jones entered. Harriet's fingers tightened slightly under the table. He didn't look at her. Not once. He moved directly to the head of the table, placing his tablet down with calm precision. "Begin," he said simply, and the meeting started. Fast, controlled, unforgiving. Numbers were presented, strategies debated, decisions made in seconds that would affect millions. Harriet tried to keep up. She really did. But what kept pulling her attention wasn't the data. It was him. The way he spoke now was nothing like the man she had met before. Gone was the feigned amusement. Gone was the casual calm. This version of Clarence Jones was sharp, precise, detached in a way that made the room obey him without question. And still, he did not look at her. Not once. Harriet shifted slightly in her seat, forcing herself to focus on her notes. "He doesn't remember you." The thought came uninvited. Then another followed immediately after. Or he's pretending. That second thought made her stomach tighten. Because if it was true, then why? The meeting ended just as abruptly as it began. "Proceed with adjustments," Clarence said, closing his tablet. Everyone stood. Harriet followed suit. She was gathering her things when she felt it. That subtle shift. A pause in movement. A silence that didn't belong to the room. She looked up. Clarence was still there. Everyone else was leaving. But he hadn't moved. Victoria exited first, nodding at Harriet as she passed. "Come on." Harriet started to follow, but something stopped her. She didn't know what. Only that her feet didn't move. The door closed behind the last executive. Silence fell. Now it was just the two of them. The room suddenly felt smaller. Too bright. Clarence finally looked up, and this time, he looked directly at her. Harriet froze. Her breath caught slightly. The distance from the meeting was gone now, but his expression remained unreadable. "Stay," he said calmly. One word. No explanation. No tone change. Just control. Harriet's mind raced instantly. Why me? But she didn't ask. She simply nodded once. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. A pause. Then he walked toward her. Slow. Measured. Each step echoing softly against the polished floor. Harriet's pulse increased without permission. She told herself it was anxiety, stress, work pressure, anything but what it actually felt like. He stopped just a few feet away from her desk. Not too close. Not distant either. Just intentional. "You were in the room earlier," he said. Harriet's throat tightened slightly. "Yes." Another pause. His eyes studied her face now. Not casually, not distantly. Precisely. "I don't like distractions," he said finally. Cold. Controlled. Harriet blinked once. "I wasn't trying to be one." A faint shift in his expression. Not a smile. Not irritation. Something more restrained. "You were," he replied. Her jaw tightened. "Then maybe you should have said something earlier." Silence. The air thickened. For the first time since she met him, there was no amusement in his eyes. Only focus. "And what would you have done if I did?" he asked quietly. Harriet hesitated. "I would have listened," she said carefully. A pause. Then, softer from him, "Would you?" The question wasn't accusatory. It was testing. Harriet felt her frustration rise. Because nothing about this made sense. "You're acting like I did something wrong," she said. "You did," he replied instantly. That landed harder than expected. "And what exactly did I do?" she asked. Clarence studied her for a long moment, then said, "You drew attention in a room where attention is controlled." Harriet scoffed under her breath. "I was literally just sitting there." "And yet," he said calmly, "you were noticed." That line hit differently. Harriet stared at him. For a moment, something in his control slipped, not visibly but subtly, like he was aware of her in a way he didn't want to acknowledge. Or couldn't. She took a small step forward. "Why are you doing this?" she asked quietly. A pause. Longer this time. For a brief moment, something flickered in his expression. Recognition. But before she could catch it fully, it disappeared. "This isn't punishment," he said. Harriet's heartbeat slowed slightly. "Then what is it?" she asked. Silence again. Heavy. Controlled. Clarence looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "You're still here." Harriet frowned. "Of course I'm..." But he interrupted her. That wasn't supposed to happen. The words hit the air like a crack. Harriet froze. "What does that mean?" she asked. But instead of answering, he turned slightly toward the door, opening it, letting light flood back into the room. And just as she started to step forward, he spoke again, low, controlled, almost warning her. "This time, I didn't ignore you." Harriet stopped instantly. The door clicked shut behind Clarence Jones, and the sound felt louder than it should have in the glass-walled silence of the office. Harriet Williams stood still, not because she wanted to, but because her mind hadn't caught up with her body yet. "He recognized you." Those words kept repeating in her head like an error message she couldn't clear. And worse, he had said so calmly, like it didn't change anything, like it changed everything. Harriet finally exhaled and took a slow step forward, as if movement alone could anchor her back into logic. "No," she whispered to herself. "This doesn't make sense." But it did. Too much of it did. The elevator, the parking garage, her name, the way he looked at her in the meeting room like she was both irrelevant and carefully observed. Harriet grabbed the edge of her desk, steadying herself. Then the door opened again. She turned instantly. Clarence Jones stepped back inside. No announcement, no warning, just presence. And this time, something was different. He didn't look like the CEO of Blackwell Global Enterprises. Not fully. The distance was still there, but thinner now. Like something beneath the surface had cracked just enough to let something real show through. "Close the door," he said calmly. Harriet hesitated, then obeyed. Click. Silence returned. This time, it felt heavier. She crossed her arms immediately. "So which version of you is this now?" she asked. "The one who ignores me in meetings, or the one who pulls me into private conversations like I'm part of some experiment?" Clarence didn't react to the accusation. Instead, he walked further into the room. Slow, measured, then stopped a few feet away from her desk. "You think this is an experiment?" he asked. "It feels like one," Harriet shot back. A pause. Then he exhaled quietly, almost like he had expected that answer. "That's because you don't have all the information," he said. Harriet narrowed her eyes. "Then give it to me." Silence. For a moment, he didn't speak. And Harriet saw it again, that control, that restraint. Like every word he chose had consequences beyond the room they were standing in. Finally, he said, "I did recognize you." Harriet didn't move. "I know," she said tightly. "You already said that. I recognized you before you ever knew I existed in that elevator," he continued. Her frustration sharpened. "Then why pretend you didn't?" Clarence held her gaze, and for the first time since she met him, there was no ease in his expression, only intention. "Because I needed distance," he said. Harriet frowned. "Distance from what?" "From influence," he replied. That didn't help. "It's a workplace," she said sharply, "not a battlefield." A faint shift in his expression. "You're wrong," he said quietly. The simplicity of it made her pause. Then he continued, "People like me don't stay invisible for long. And people like you," he paused briefly, "get noticed for all the wrong reasons." Harriet's chest tightened slightly. "People like me?" "Yes," he said. No hesitation. That stung more than she expected. Clarence stepped slightly closer, not invading her space, but closing the emotional distance anyway. "I saw you in the parking garage," he said. "You were already late, already frustrated, already standing out." Harriet scoffed. "So your solution was to ignore me like I didn't exist?" "My solution," he corrected calmly, "was to see how you handled being unseen." That hit differently. Harriet blinked. "That doesn't make any sense." "It does in my world," he said. She shook her head slightly. "So what was this? A test?" "No." "Then what?" A pause. Longer this time. Clarence's eyes held hers steadily now, and when he spoke, his voice was lower, controlled, but no longer distant. "Protection." Harriet froze slightly. "Protection? Yes. From what?" His jaw tightened slightly. "For me being seen with you too early." That answer didn't land cleanly. It hung in the air. Unfinished. Dangerous. Harriet's frustration softened into confusion. "I don't understand." Clarence looked away briefly, just for a second, then back at her. "Blackwell doesn't forgive distractions," he said, "and I don't create them unless I'm prepared for the consequences." Harriet studied him carefully now. You're saying I would have been a distraction? I'm saying you already were, he corrected. That silence after his words felt different. Heavier, but less sharp. Harriet's arms slowly lowered from their defensive position. Then why bring me here at all? She asked more quietly. Clarence didn't answer immediately. And in that pause, something shifted. Not in the room. In him. I didn't bring you here by accident, he said finally. Harriet's breath slowed slightly. Then why? She asked. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he took one more step closer. This time, the space between them wasn't just physical. It was intentional. You want simple answers, he said. I want honest ones, she replied. A faint pause. Then he said, You don't belong in the category I expected. Harriet frowned. That's not an answer. It's the only one you need right now. Silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, but charged. Harriet felt it then. Something shifting. Not clarity. Not confusion. Something in between. Respect. And something sharper underneath it. Something she didn't want to name yet. You ignored me in a meeting, she said quietly. Yes. Why? Another pause. Then, more quietly than before. Because I didn't want them to notice what I noticed. Harriet's breath caught slightly. And what did you notice? She asked. Clarence held her gaze for a long moment. Too long. Then said simply, that you don't break easily. The words landed differently than everything before. Harriet didn't respond immediately, because something in her chest tightened, not for frustration this time, from awareness. He wasn't dismissing her. He wasn't erasing her. He was watching her, closely, deliberately, and for reasons she didn't fully understand yet. Clarence stepped back slightly, re-establishing distance. This wasn't supposed to become personal, he said. Harriet exhaled slowly. It already did. A pause. Their eyes met again. And this time, neither of them looked away immediately. Then Clarence turned toward the door. But before he opened it, he stopped. Without turning back, he said quietly, This wasn't over, not even close. The door closed behind Clarence Jones with a soft, final click. But the silence he left behind didn't feel empty. It felt charged. Harriet Williams stood still in the center of her office, staring at the space where he had been just seconds earlier. Her heart hadn't fully settled yet. Not after everything he had said. Not after everything he hadn't said. She slowly lowered herself in her chair, but even sitting didn't ground her the way it usually did. Because nothing about this day had been normal. Nothing about him was normal. Harriet exhaled slowly, trying to organize her thoughts. Protection. Distance. Control. Not punishment. Not ignorance. Something more calculated than she had initially believed. And yet, none of it explained the way her chest tightened whenever he looked at her, or the way silence felt heavier when he was near. Her phone vibrated suddenly on the desk. Harriet jumped slightly, then frowned as she reached for it. Unknown number. No preview. Just one message. She hesitated, then opened it. You left before I finished speaking. Harriet froze. Her fingers tightened around the phone. No name. No signature. But she already knew. Clarence. Her eyes flicked toward the closed door instinctively, as if expecting him to still be standing there. But the hallway was empty. Still. Controlled. Silent. She read the message again, then typed slowly. You said enough. 3 dots appeared almost immediately. Typing. No delay. No hesitation. That alone made her pulse shift slightly. Then, no. Harriet stared at the screen. That single word felt heavier than it should have. Like a correction, or a warning, or something else entirely. Before she could respond, another message appeared. Tomorrow, 8 a.m., be on time. Her brow furrowed slightly. For what? She typed back. The reply came instantly, almost as if he had already been waiting for her question. You'll see. Harriet leaned back in her chair slowly. Her grip on the phone loosened slightly, but her mind didn't. Because this wasn't just instruction. It was expectation, and somehow certainty. She placed the phone down carefully. But the silence in the room no longer felt like peace. It felt like anticipation. Later that evening, the city outside Blackwell Global Enterprises glowed in layers of gold and white light. Traffic moved below like flowing rivers, unaware of the quiet tension unfolding above them. Harriet remained at her desk longer than she needed to, not because she had work, but because leaving felt like stepping away from something unfinished. Victoria had already gone. The floor was quieter now, almost empty. Harriet gathered her things slowly, her thoughts still circling the same questions. Why her? Why this attention? Why this distance? And why did it feel like every answer only created more questions? She stood up finally, and that was when she noticed it. A small envelope placed neatly on her desk. No name, no stamp, just her initials. HW. Her stomach tightened slightly. She didn't remember it being there. She hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a single printed line. Some decisions change how people see you. Some change how they keep seeing you. Harriet frowned. No signature, but she didn't need one anymore. Clarence. She looked up slowly toward the glass wall. Across the building, the executive floor was still lit. One office remained illuminated. Just one. Harriet stared at it for a long moment, then looked away. At exactly 8:02 p.m., her phone buzzed again. This time, a new message. Still at the building. Harriet's breath slowed. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she walked to the glass window of her office, looking out over the city skyline. Bright, endless, alive. And somewhere in that structure of light and steel, he was still there, watching, or waiting, or both. Her phone buzzed again. You're not supposed to be thinking this much. That made her exhale a quiet laugh under her breath. She finally typed, then stop making me. 3 dots. Then nothing. For the first time that day, no immediate reply came. Harriet stood there, phone in hand, staring at the glowing city below. Her reflection stared back at her through the glass. And for a moment, she didn't feel like a new employee anymore. She felt like someone standing at the edge of something she hadn't agreed to step into, but already had. Somewhere above her, in the quiet height of the executive floor, a light switched off. Then another. But one remained on, and Harriet couldn't shake the feeling that tomorrow wouldn't be a normal workday. Not anymore, because somehow their story was only just beginning. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more cinematic, emotional billionaire romance stories like this one. And tell me in the comments. Back-end index pointing right, do you think Clarence is protecting Harriet or pulling her into something she can't escape? Because this is only part 1. Fire Part 2 continues the moment everything changes again.